about halfway between West Egg and New York. The road runs beside the railroad through a lonely place called the Valley of Ashes. It's a gray, sad land where ashes pile up like hills and cover everything: houses, smoke, even people. Gray cars move slowly, and ash-covered men with shovels raise dust clouds that hide their work. Watching over all of this are the large blue eyes of Dr. T. Holt Eckelberg. These eyes, on an old billboard with yellow glasses, stare silently over the valley. No one takes care of the sign anymore, but the eyes remain. Next to the valley is a dirty river, and when the train stops at the bridge, passengers often see this gloomy place. It was there that I first met Tom Buchanan's mistress. People knew about her and disliked how Tom behaved in public with her. I didn't want to meet her, but I did. One Sunday, Tom and I were on the train to New York. When it stopped near the Ashes, he grabbed my arm and said, "We're getting off. I want you to meet my girl." He had been drinking and acted like I had no choice. We crossed a low fence and walked under the watching eyes of Dr. Eckelberg. The only building nearby was a small yellow brick block with 3 shops, one empty, Wilson. Inside, it was poor and empty, with one dusty car. I wondered if there were rooms upstairs, but then Mr. Wilson appeared. He was pale and tired, but had a gentle look. When he saw us, his pale blue eyes lit up with hope. "Hello, Wilson, old man," said Tom, slapping him jovially on the shoulder. "How's business?" "I can't complain," answered Wilson unconvincingly. "And if you feel that way about it, maybe I'd better sell it somewhere else after all." "I don't mean that," explained Wilson quickly. "I just meant—" His voice grew quieter, and Tom looked around the garage with impatience. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and soon a thick woman appeared, blocking the light from the office door. She was in her mid-30s and a bit heavy, but she carried her weight in a confident and attractive way, like some women do. Her face, above a spotted dark blue dress, was not beautiful or shiny, but she had a strong energy, as if her body was always alive with tension. She smiled slowly, walked past her husband as if he wasn't there, and shook Tom's hand while looking him directly in the eyes. Then she wet her lips and spoke to her husband without turning. Wilson answered quickly and went toward the small office, blending into the gray walls. White ash dust covered his dark suit and pale hair, just like it covered everything nearby except his wife, who moved closer to Tom. "I want to see you," said Tom intently. "Get on the next train." "All right, I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level." She nodded and moved away from him just as George Wilson emerged with 2 chairs from his office door. We waited for her down the road and out of sight. It was a few days before the 4th of July, and a gray, scrawny Italian child was setting torpedoes in a row along the railroad track. "Terrible place, isn't it?" said Tom, exchanging a frown with Dr. Eckelberg. "Awful. It does her good to get away." "Doesn't her husband object?" Wilson? He thinks she goes to see her sister in New York, for Mrs. Wilson sat discreetly in another car. Tom deferred that much to the sensibilities of those East Eggers who might be on the train. She had changed her dress to a brown-figured muslin, which stretched tight over her rather wide hips as Tom helped her to the platform in New York. At the newsstand, she bought a copy of Town Tattle and a moving picture magazine, and in the station drugstore some cold cream and a small flask of perfume. Upstairs, in the solemn, echoing drive, she let 4 taxicabs drive away before she selected a new one, lavender-colored with gray upholstery, and in this we slid out from the mass of the station into the glowing sunshine. But immediately she turned sharply from the window and, leaning forward, tapped on the front glass. "I want to get one for the apartment. They're nice to have." "A dog," Rockefeller. In a basket swung from his neck cowered a dozen very recent puppies of an indeterminate breed. What kind are they? Asked Mrs. Wilson eagerly as he came to the taxi window. All kinds. What kind do you want? Plunged in his hand and drew one up, wriggling by the back of the neck. That's no police dog, said Tom. No, it's not exactly a police dog, said the man with disappointment in his voice. It's more of an Airedale. He passed his hand over the brown wash rag of a back. Look at that coat. Some coat. Wilson, enthusiastically. That dog will cost you $10. The Airedale. Undoubtedly, there was an Airedale concerned in it somewhere, though its feet were startlingly white, changed hands and settled down into Mrs. Daisy Wilson's lap, where she fondled the weatherproof coat with rapture. Is it a boy or a girl? She asked delicately. That dog's a boy. It's a bitch, said Tom decisively. Here's your money. Go and buy 10 more dogs with it. We drove over to Fifth Avenue, so warm and soft, almost pastoral, on the summer Sunday afternoon that I wouldn't have been surprised to see a great flock of white sheep turn the corner. Hold on, I said. I have to leave you here. No, you don't, interposed Tom quickly. Myrtle'll be hurt if you don't come up to the apartment. Won't you, Myrtle? Come on, she urged. I'll telephone my sister Catherine. She's said to be very beautiful by people who ought to know. But we went on, cutting back again over the park toward the West Hundreds. At 58th Street, the cab stopped at one slice in a long white cake of apartment houses. Throwing a regal homecoming glance around the neighborhood, Mrs. Daisy Wilson gathered up her dog and her other purchases and went haughtily in. I'm going to have the McKees come up, she announced as we rose in the elevator. And, of course, I got to call up my sister, too. The apartment was on the top floor and had a small living room, dining room, bedroom, and bath room. The living room was full of big, fancy furniture that made it hard to walk without bumping into tapestries of women in gardens. One picture on the wall looked like a hen, but turned into a woman in a bonnet when seen from far away. On the table were old magazines and a book called Peter. Wilson first took care of the dog. An elevator boy brought a box of straw, some milk, and dog biscuits. One biscuit stayed in the milk all afternoon. Tom opened a locked cabinet and took out whiskey. I had only been drunk twice in my life, and this was the second time. The room stayed sunny until after 8. Wilson sat on Tom's lap, made phone calls, and I went out to buy cigarettes. When I came back, they were gone. I read a bit of Simon Called Peter, but it made no sense, maybe from the whiskey. Tom and Myrtle came back, and guests arrived. Myrtle's sister, Catherine, was around 30, with red hair and white skin. Her eyebrows were redrawn and her bracelets made noise. She walked in like she owned the place. I asked if she lived there. She laughed and said she stayed at a hotel. McKee came from downstairs. He was pale and polite, with a bit of shaving cream on his cheek. He said he worked in art, and later I learned he was a photographer who took the faded photo of Mrs. Taken W., Wilson's mother. His wife was loud, tired, and proud that he had taken 127 photos of her since they got married. Mrs. Wilson had changed into a cream-colored dress that made a soft sound when she moved. Her personality also changed. She now acted proud and dramatic. She laughed loudly and spoke like she was on stage. She complained about men and told a story about a foot care lady who charged too much. McKee said she loved the dress. Mrs. Wilson said it was just something old. McKee said her husband could take a great photo of her in that pose. McKee stared at her and said he'd change the lighting and pull back her hair. Mrs. McKee said nothing needed to change. Then Tom yawned and said the McKees needed more drinks. He told Myrtle to get more ice. She rolled her eyes, said people were lazy, kissed the dog, and went to the kitchen like she was rich. I'd done some nice things out on Long Island, asserted Mr. McKee. Tom looked at him blankly. 2 studies. One of them I call Montauk Point. The gulls. Do you live down on Long Island too? She inquired. I live at West Egg. Really? I was down there at a party about a month ago, at a man named Gatsby's. Do you know him? I live next door to him. Well, they say he's a nephew or a cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm's. That's where all his money comes from. 25? Really? She nodded. I'm scared of him. I'd hate to have him get anything on me. This absorbing information about my neighbor was interrupted by Mrs. McKee's pointing suddenly at Catherine. Chester, I think you could do something with her. She broke out, but Mr. McKee only nodded in a bored way and turned his attention to Tom. I'd like to do more work on Long Island if I could get the entry. All I ask is that they should give me a start. Ask Myrtle, said Tom, breaking into a short shout of laughter as Mrs. Tents Wilson entered with a tray. She'll give you a letter of introduction, won't you, Myrtle? Do what? She asked, startled. You'll give McKee a letter of introduction to your husband, George B.D. Wilson, at the gasoline pump. What I say is, why go on living with them if they can't stand them? It came from Myrtle, who had overheard the question, and it was violent and obscene. You see, cried Catherine triumphantly. She lowered her voice again. Ideas? It's really his wife that's keeping them apart. And I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of the lie. When they do get married, continued Catherine. Do you like Europe? She exclaimed surprisingly. I went over there with another girl. Stay long? No, we just went to Monte Carlo and back. We went by way of Marseille. We had over $1,200 when we started, but we got gypped out of it all in 2 days in the private rooms. We had an awful time getting back, I can tell you. How I hated that town. McKee called me back into the room. I almost made a mistake, too, she declared vigorously. I almost married a little kike who'd been after me for years. I knew he was below me. Everybody kept saying to me, Lucille, that man's way below you. But if I hadn't met Chester, he'd have got me sure. Yes, but listen, said Myrtle Wilson, nodding her head up and down. At least you didn't marry him. I know I didn't. Well, I married him, said Myrtle, ambiguously, and that's the difference between your case and mine. Why did you, Myrtle? Demanded Catherine. Nobody forced you to. Myrtle considered. Considered. I married him because I thought he was a gentleman, she said finally. I thought he knew something about breeding, but he wasn't fit to lick my shoe. Crazy about him, cried Myrtle incredulously. I never was any more crazy about him than I was about that man there. She pointed suddenly at me, and everyone looked at me accusingly. I tried to show by my expression that I had played no part in her past. The only crazy I was when I married him. I knew right away I made a mistake. He borrowed somebody's best suit to get married in and never even told me about it. And the man came after it one day when he was out. Oh, is that your suit? I said. This is the first I ever heard about it. But I gave it to him, and then I lay down and cried to beat the band all afternoon. She really ought to get away from him. Resumed Catherine to me. They've been living over that garage for 11 years. Though Catherine said she felt fine without it. Tom called the janitor to get sandwiches that were more like full meals. I wanted to leave and walk through the quiet streets, but every time I tried, loud arguments pulled me back like invisible ropes. From the street below, our bright windows must have looked mysterious. I felt both inside and outside the room, amazed and disturbed by everything. Myrtle moved close and told me how she met Tom. It was on the last seats left on the train. I was going to see my sister. He wore a tuxedo and shiny shoes. I stared at him but pretended to read. At the station, his shirt touched my arm. I joked I'd call a cop, but he knew I wouldn't. I was so excited that I didn't notice we got into a taxi, not the subway. I kept thinking, you can't live forever. Then she laughed and told Mrs. Das, "McKee, I'll give you this dress. I need a new one tomorrow. I have a list massage, hair wave, dog collar, one of those ashtrays that open, and a wreath for my mother's grave. At 9 o'clock." Then suddenly, 10. Mr. McKee was asleep in a chair with his fists closed. I wiped the shaving cream from his cheek. The dog sat on the table, staring into the smoky air and making small noises. People moved around, got lost, and found each other again. Near midnight, Tom and Myrtle argued about whether she could say Daisy's name. "Daisy, Daisy, Daisy," shouted Mrs. Wilson. "I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy, die." Making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. Then there were bloody towels on the bathroom floor and women's voices shouting in anger, mixed with a long, painful cry rising above the chaos. Mr. McKee woke up from his nap and, still half asleep, began walking toward the door. Halfway there, he stopped and turned back to look. His wife and Catherine were rushing around the crowded room, arguing and trying to help at the same time, while the bleeding woman lay helplessly on the couch, trying to cover the fancy Versailles-themed furniture with a gossip magazine called Town Tattle. McKee watched for a moment, then quietly turned and walked out the door. I took my hat from the chandelier and followed him out. "Come to lunch someday," he suggested, as we groaned down in the elevator. "Where?" "Anywhere. Keep your hands off the lever," snapped the elevator boy. "I beg your pardon," said Mr. McKee with dignity. "I didn't know I was touching it." "All right," I agreed. "I'll be glad to." I was standing beside his bed, and he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear, with a great portfolio in his hands. Beauty and the Beast, Loneliness, Old Grocery Horse, Brooklyn Bridge, Bricken. Then I was lying half asleep in the cold lower level of the Pennsylvania station, staring at the Morning Tribune and waiting for the 4 o'clock train.